Today we are talking about the work stipends for literature in non-German language in 2026. The work stipends are targeted at professionally working authors who do not write in German, and only writers whose primary place of residence is in Berlin will be granted a stipend. We are funding fiction, children's and youth literature, as well as poetry, but no drama, no non-fiction, and no translations. These are excluded. Especially for drama and translations, there are other funding programs to apply for. You can only send us one application. Only one application per applicant is possible. As I said already, you need to have your primary place of residence in Berlin. And if you receive a stipend next year, you cannot combine it with a grant from the German Literature Fund within the same funding period. If this is the case, if you receive a stipend from the German Literature Fund, please get in touch and we find a solution. If you receive any other stipends from the state of Berlin in 2026, there are several work stipends and research stipends. You may combine our stipend with those up to an amount of 24,000 euros per year. Anyway, you need to state on the application all stipends applied for are already approved for the year 2026, and the receipt of further stipends must be reported immediately because we might need to react to that immediately. As in the years before, the stipends are each endowed with a lump sum of 24,000 euros for a period of 12 months. That's for a year, from January to December. You may also apply for 16,000 euros for a period of 8 months, from February to September, or for 8,000 for a period of 4 months from February to May. You are asked to select the stipend amount in the online form. The jury may change the period you have applied for at its discretion and reduce the period from 12 to 8 months or from 8 to 4 months. Not the other way around. During and after the stipend, we're planning a public presentation with the stipend holders, probably in summer 2026. In the last years, the Lettrétage Colloquium Berlin, LCB, was the host, and will probably do it again. They will get in touch with the stipend holders in time. After the stipend, you must complete an evaluation form that I will send you beforehand. Now about those who cannot apply. If you're enrolled in a college or university, you may not apply. Writers who work as professors at a college or university are not eligible to apply either, as well as employees of the Senate Department for Culture and Social Cohesion and members of the jury, as well as their families, are not eligible either. Deadline for submission of the application is May 2025 at 11 a.m. Central European Time, just there is no unclarity here. Applications can only be submitted online. The link will be made available in good time on the Senate Administration website. Applications cannot be sent by mail or email. It's all electronic here. The online application form and a short description must be completed in German. I will speak about this again, but that's really important. The application, as I said already, the application form must be completed in German. I'm speaking about the online tool. The Projektkurzbeschreibung, a short description of your work project, needs to be written in German. If it is not written in German, but in English or another language, we need to formally reject your application. Consider that you are applying for a stipend at a German authority. We're now speaking about the application itself, the form. I also ask you to indicate the language of the text sample in the short description. Regarding the uploads, I recommend that you prepare everything beforehand to have no problems during the application and upload. We need a CV from you. You may write this in German or in English. We ask you to, additionally to your biographical data and what you want to tell us, artistic career, education, to also include a list of your publications in the last 3 years. If applicable, please link to reviews of your publications in your CV. We also need the exposé, the project description, in German or English. The exposé refers to the submitted text sample. It describes the text sample. We ask you to indicate the language of the text sample in the exposé. That's very important because otherwise I need to research, because I need to tell the jury which language is the language of your text sample and to find the experts for that. Very important, the exposé must not be longer than 2 A4 pages, including everything, bibliographies, illustrations. This attachment may not be longer than 2 pages. If you upload a 3rd page, we need to formally reject your application. Then the core piece of the application, your text sample. It needs to be a text sample of an unfinished literary project. You may not have published this yet. Very important, it must not be longer than 20 pages A4. If you upload 21 pages, we need to formally reject your application. Please make sure to not make this mistake. Then we need a proof of residence in Berlin and a residence permit. For the first time, you may use the EID function. If you have that, you know how it works. If you don't know that, you probably you haven't activated it. If you use this, you do not need to upload any further proof of ID. Please follow the procedure for the online ID function in the application form. If you don't have the EID, we have different procedures. For applicants with the German citizenship, we need a copy of your identity card, your valid identity card, front and back. For applicants from European Union countries, we need a copy of your identity card or passport, front and back, and a copy of the registration confirmation, Meldebestätigung, issued by Berlin's Residence Registration Office. For applicants from non-European Union countries with residence permit card, Aufenthaltstitelkarte, the residence permit card is valid as an identity document and as confirmation of registration. Please upload the corresponding page with the Berlin address. For applicants from non-European Union countries without residence permit card, we need a copy of your identity card or passport front and back, and a copy of the registration confirmation, Meldebestätigung, issued by Berlin's Residence Registration Office, and a copy of your residence permit or certificate of the right of residence front and back. Important notes regarding the application. Only complete, formally valid and timely applications will be considered for evaluation and sent to the jury. Missing documents will not be requested subsequently. If you forget something, it is your own responsibility. I said already, documents in paper form will not be accepted. Once the application has been submitted electronically and you wish to make changes to your application material, you cannot add the attachments of the application that you submitted already. Before the deadline, you may make changes to your application by submitting a completely new application. For this, you also need to send me an email to withdraw your application, your first application, and submit a complete new application. Applicants are responsible for submitting the application complete and on time. What happens after submitting the application? We check your documents for completeness and eligibility to apply. If this is the case, the documents are forwarded to the jury. The jury reviews the documents and selects the stipend recipients in a full-day selection session. Afterwards, all applicants receive information by email no matter if you're rejected or if you receive the stipend, you will be informed. And we plan to send this email in December, but the city's budget is only completed in January 26. Thus, we might only know about our budget and about the possible funding in January, and we cannot act on it in December beforehand. Thus, we might send the information email only in January 26. We cannot say this right now. Then the stipend recipients receive notifications by post. This might also only happen in January or even February 26 because the finance authorities need to finalize their processes and the procedures for us. This is beyond our reach and decision competence. These are the people who decide, and we need to wait for this. After you have received the notification, if you were successful as a stipend recipient, you need to return the declaration of consent with your bank account details so that we know where to transfer the money. If you need further information, we have the information sheet with all the regulations. This is valid. Please read it all properly, and we also have frequently asked questions on the website. If you have any further questions, you can reach me, preferably by email, but you can also call me. That's it. Thank you very much.
All right, and now the questions.
What is understood in this call as a professional writer? Es gab auch die Frage, are we eligible to apply if this is our first book and we don't have any publicized work before? Yeah, related to that.
Would it be okay to simply mention having received awards for literature, prizes for literature already, without having much experience or professional work in the writing field? So there is no requirement that you must have published already in order to apply. However, we do not educate you. This stipend is to further your writing development. We should also mention that in the past it has happened that newcomers have been awarded the stipend. However, the chances are relatively small that if you are a newcomer, you will be granted the stipend. It is possible, but the chances are not very high. So to keep it short, if you are a newcomer in the field, you definitely may apply without having any publications already in your name. But the question would be how high your chances may be. Of course, we cannot already say that. We are not in the jury. But our experience has been that the chances are relatively small. We have a very high number of applicants, very, very many already published authors who apply, who have already published works. And therefore, for the jury, it's much easier to recognize the literary quality of this work, which has been confirmed by already being published. If you have already been recognized in the literary field with awards or prizes or have taken part in special programs, you probably don't have very high chances within this pool of published authors. One person asks, is it possible to move to Berlin in order to take part in the stipend? How does that work with the Berlin address? And then the question also appeared in reverse. If you currently live in Berlin, but in the next few months you will be moving to Brandenburg, so is it relevant that your address is in Berlin when you apply or when you take part in the stipend? Both are significant. At the time of application, you must prove your address, your residence in Berlin. You must consider that these stipends are being offered from the Berlin household, the Berlin budget, City of Berlin funding. Therefore, it is offered to Berlin citizens, Berlin residents who live and work here. So therefore, during the time that you are receiving the stipend, you should also be a resident of the city of Berlin. If you are planning to change your place of residence and move away from Berlin, then and you don't declare this to us and we find out, then it could happen that the stipend we have granted to you, we will require you to pay it back. That would be the consequence if we discover that you are no longer a Berlin resident. There are also questions about the formatting for the exposé.
Should I include in the exposé how much I plan to write? For example, the number of pages per day or per year?
And a further question was the difference between a short description and an exposé. The short description is part of the application form and it's limited to 1,900 characters. The exposé is an upload, which you have to separately upload online and has 20 pages. So from the length, there's a big difference in the length of these two things. In terms of the content, there is not so much difference. You could do a very short, compressed version of your exposé in the short description if you wish. Just to be very clear, the jury receives a list of all of the short descriptions which are already summarized. So these are quick summaries for the jury. Here's the name of the person and oh yes, this was about that project where they were dealing with this and that theme. The exposé, you can really, and you should really, describe what literary form would you be using. Are you writing poetry? Is it a novel? Is it a short story? A collection of short stories? How many pages do you plan to write for the project? What are the characters? The setting, the literary form that you're planning to use, what genre would you like to write in for your literary plans? What are the backgrounds of the narrative or the story that you want to develop? That is what belongs in the exposé. And maybe also important to know for the jury, the question about how long the work should be is important.
I was wondering if there are any formatting requirements for the pages presented, zum Beispiel 12-point Times New Roman, double-spaced.
Those are the regular norm pages, so-called norm pages. No, we don't have these requirements. We simply request you to consider very good legibility, that it's easy to read. In this context, it's often recommended also to use a font that doesn't have serifs, for example, Arial, that the size of the font is 12-point, so that it's very clear to read. Or if you have something else similar in your program, you can use that. But it's important that it's very clear and easy to read, not a big dense block of crowded text that's very hard to read. The jury has to read an incredible amount. So it is really good when you use a font with 12-point or at least 11-point, because it's very difficult to read text that's crowded from edge to edge of the page without a border, because I really want to cram as much as possible from my writing into this sample. And you might be the 100th application that they're reading, and it's really difficult for the jury then to deal with it. They're reading up to 200 applications and so many pages. So consider what would be good for them.
Just as there is no equivalent to belletristic in many other markets, I assume that a memoir is also considered Sachbuch in the context of the stipend. I would also like to know if the grant supports only fiction or also non-fiction or creative non-fiction.
So belletristic, we do mean fiction. There is no one-to-one translation. About memoir, this is a bit of a gray zone. We really can't just answer it ad hoc. Memoir, you will have to decide, does it belong more to the literature area, or is it more of an actual work of fact? So it's up to you, and the jury will have to decide whether it's really fiction. But if it's very clearly non-fiction, then it won't be submitted, it won't be allowed to be eligible to be considered. And there were a few more questions about self-published books. Do they count as publications? If you have a self-published work, can it be presented as an example of our previous publications? Yes, you could do that. As we have mentioned, it's not required that you have already published works from a publishing house in order to apply for the stipend. I understand this one question about self-publishing, rather whether a self-published book is already considered to be published if it's a work in progress. Can I apply with a book I plan to self-publish as the project? I'm assuming that if a self-published book is already published, then it's already closed and finished, then it can't be the project for which you apply with this stipend. That's right. The project, the work sample that you are using, which you plan to finish with the stipend, it can't be finished, it can't be published. Even if it's only self-published, it cannot be considered as the work project for the stipend. Nothing that has been already published can be presented as a work sample for this stipend.
Did I understand correctly that it's important to the jury to know how long the final book / collection / project is supposed to be, as in estimated page count, because it's supposed to be something that could reasonably be completed during the time of the grant?
If I remember correctly, Sarah also asked how about doctoral students, if they're counted as immatriculated, and if this is relevant to the application. So if you have an immatriculation to a university, then you're not eligible to apply. Regarding the page count, it's important to mention the page count in the exposé so that the jury can evaluate if the sum that you're applying for is realistic. If you only want to write 50 pages, but you ask for 24,000 euros, then this is not a realistic idea, and the jury would reduce that. But if you're planning to write a novel of 400 pages and you apply for 24,000 euros for 12 months, and your text sample convinces the jury, then of course it is legitimate that the jury would give you 24,000 euros as well. It is relevant to indicate the estimated page count in the exposé.
As an EU citizen, are Anmeldung in Berlin and an EU ID card or passport sufficient? Or is the Meldebestätigung you were referring to a document other than the Anmeldung?
Definitely, if you're a European Union citizen, we need a copy of your identity card or passport and the Meldebestätigung, the registration confirmation. When you registered in Berlin, you received a paper that you need to upload. This is obligatory. If you don't upload anything there, you cannot continue with the application procedure. Or if you upload anything else, I need to formally reject your application. Yeah, of course, I believe it's a question about the terminology. If Meldebestätigung, Meldebescheinigung, Anmeldung, this is all the same document, right? It's just different words in different contexts. Yeah, of course, yes. The paper you receive from the registration office when you register in Berlin with your Berlin address. This is the document we need here.
Can literary competence be shown also by poetic performances, or must our work be published somewhere before?
Does it count if there was a performance? Does it count as literary experience? As we said already, you don't need to have published to apply in the first place, but the question is in how far your previous work shows literary quality, and if the jury may want to fund you as a newcomer if you have no standing in the literature scene. Your literary quality is hard to evaluate for the jury if they can only do this by your exposé and your text sample. Thus, you would need to put a lot of energy, especially into your text sample.
If my visa or residency will expire in 3 months by the deadline and I'm eligible for a longer one, how will this work?
If you make a new appointment with the Ausländerbehörde on time, And if you receive a confirmation of this appointment there, it usually reads that your resident status is valid until this appointment. And if everything works out well, you receive a confirmation that you may stay longer and live in Berlin, in Germany. It is important for me to see this confirmation from the office that you have an appointment and that your status is valid until this appointment.
I am not sure exactly which of my poems will be in my first collection, which I'm now finishing and plan to publish sooner, or the second collection I'm now proposing. Is the distinction so important for the Arbeitsprobe if both are unpublished?
If you publish poems now, then they already have a literary worth that has been evaluated by a publisher, and it wouldn't be right or fair if you put these poems that have been considered as good already, then it would be unfair for the other applicants. Therefore, we need something that hasn't been published yet. Maybe that's an important information here, because many questions in the chat point to that. The project that you're proposing must be unfinished. If the jury reads your CV and sometimes they look at publishers' pages or something and they see that the book that you're proposing is published in the next month, you won't receive this funding. The goal of this funding is to finish a project, and you receive the stipend to have the time to do that. Thus, if you apply for 24,000 euros, your project needs another 12 months until it is finished. You're not at the end of the project yet, that's what I want to say. If you apply for 8,000 euros, your project might have come further, but you need the money to work on the draft further. Thus, for poets, that's a little difficult because we need to see from your application that the poetry that you might be working on an anthology, on a collection that you want to finish with our stipend. Shall the text sample be an excerpt from the text or book that we're proposing, or can it be random text? We don't ask you for any proof that you have worked on the text that you have submitted with your application. Thus, it might be the situation that you realize during the stipend period that what you have worked on is bad and you need to work on something else. This is legitimate as well. Thus, if you are submitting a text now that you're convinced of now, it's legitimate. But it's also legitimate if you realize later, if you don't want to complete this project but to write something else. The stipend is also offering you the opportunity to have this freedom for such experiments without failing.
Are you permitted to travel during the stipend period, or do you need to be in Berlin the entire time? And if you can travel, are there restrictions on how long you can be away for? For example, would travel for a month or two be permitted?
Of course, you're allowed to travel. We cannot forbid that. But you should be in Berlin for the majority of the stipend time period. Otherwise, we wonder why we should fund you if you don't live in Berlin anymore. But 1 to 2 months is legitimate, of course. As long as your place of residence officially is Berlin. But if you're traveling the world and you cancel your registration in Berlin, then it doesn't work. Just as an example.
Can I apply for the work stipend to do a political trilogy that I'm trying to carry out within 1 year, although it's not published yet and only partly written? Yes. I'm not sure I understand the background of the question, but it seems pretty clear to me. The stipend are exactly designed to support works in progress, unfinished projects.
Is it advantageous or disqualifying if we already have interest in our book project?
If a publishing house is already interested in picking up this project, then you should definitely mention that in the exposé, because, of course, it does have an influence on your finalization, and it has an influence on the jury's decision. If a publishing house is interested in the project, then it will depend on how far you have gone with that. If the book, for example, is already about to be published in the middle of 2026, then it will have a huge influence on the decision about the funding.
About citing examples of past work, my last book was published longer than 3 years ago, as were other articles, etc. How to deal with these older examples if the cutoff is 3 years.
So we wrote 3 years because we are of the opinion that if you're a professional author, then you probably publish relatively regularly. But if your last publications are already more than 3 years ago, then you can certainly mention them. There's no strict separation from us. It's simply that it's more relevant probably for the jury if more recent works are in your CV, but it's not meant to be a hard deadline.
For the writing sample, another question, should it be a single text of max 20 pages, or is it okay to combine various texts not exceeding the 20-page limit?
You may do that if, for example, you're writing some short works, but it should be recognizable to the jury what you're doing, where the one story ends and the next one begins. In our experience here, we understand that maybe you want to show various sides of your work or something short, but if you want to do that, then your expose should talk about that or explain that. What is the one story about? What is the other story about? So what are the contexts of these various stories in order to understand that?
If we need to do research for a project, is that research financeable?
Yes, of course. The stipend, if it's funding travels to Greenland or Munich for an archive, it's certainly legitimate. I was asking whether she can apply for the stipend if she is part-time employed. Yes, of course, it's possible. It's clear to us that if you're working in the field, you could have a job just to pay your rent and finance your life.
Do I have to include samples of completed work in books published?
There's no place to upload samples of previously published works. This year we have consciously decided to exclude that for the specific reason that you have to consider that the jury, just only with the writing samples with the expose, have hundreds of pages to read. And then if we add published works, how many applicants? 241. And 2 years ago it was over 300 applicants. The jury has so much to read. If you then also upload further samples of your work, the jury simply can't manage to read it all. And we realize that the applicants are very determined to add these extra writing samples. So we eliminated that part of the application so that the applicants can just concentrate on the expose and the writing sample. Am I required to complete a novel within the financed period of time? What happens if I can't finish the novel within the financed site? No, you're not required. You're not required to finish the project within the period of time that is funded. If you realize that you want to start over in the middle or begin to go in a different direction, it's certainly allowed. But we are of course very happy when you do manage to complete the project in the time, but it's not at all required.
Is there a lower limit on the page count for the sample pages? Also, maximum is 20. Is there a minimum? And if so, what?
There is no minimum. If she does simply want to submit a single page, that's her own risk that she takes, or perhaps that one page is completely convincing, but that's not very realistic. But there is no minimum page count, only the maximum page count. I saw one more question, if I may pitch in here. Yes? If one can upload reviews of your work. There was a possibility earlier to do that, but there is no longer. The jury has requested that we not add any reviews, also so that they can concentrate themselves only on the expose and the writing symbol. The jury has always let us know that additional documentation, they don't manage to read it. It's just too much. But in your CV, of course, you can certainly paste in links up to reviews of your work. So please do add that kind of information as a link in your CV. I would use the opportunity now just to make you aware that we do have a new application tool, this online tool. Maybe you're used to our old system if you've already applied with us, but now we have a new page which is much more intuitive to use than the last one. We consciously decided not to present it in the presentation today, this tool, because it takes a lot of time to present it, and therefore there was much less time just to answer your questions. But as we said, the new application tool is much more intuitive and easier to use, and it goes step by step and leads you through the questions and the uploading of your data. One person is asking if there's a preset format for the CV. Does it have to be a table form? What resume CV form would be acceptable? It really doesn't matter. There is no preset form required from us. But do consider the legibility, that it is clearly easy to read. One follow-up question to a question that was already asked. If it's an advantage, if, for example, there has been a letter of interest from a literary agent or a publishing house, would it be disadvantageous to share that? If it's already a statement from the publishing house, it does show, it could be advantageous. It does show that your literary quality has gathered attention, and it confirms that. I could recommend that, yes, it's not disadvantageous. Is a person who is registered as seeking a job at the job center and living on the so-called Bürgergeld, social funding, are they allowed to apply? Yes, of course. There's absolutely no exclusion criteria if you're job seeking at the job center. Are bilingual people with German and one other non-German language, can they apply for this stipend? It really depends on which language you prefer to use in writing. There are literary talents who can write equally well in two languages. Wait a moment, I think the question is about whether it's a bilingual project being written in more than one language, German and one other language. This is the non-German language literature, but you could apply with the non-German language. You could apply as a bilingual project with German, but you might be in a disadvantage. You definitely want to mention that combination of languages as a bilingual project in your short description.
Last year, I submitted some existing translations in the extra Arbeitsprobe section, since I write in a very small language, and I know it will be hard to find people who can read it. Is there still a place for this?
No. As we mentioned before, the mentioned reasons earlier, the jury no longer accepts these extra materials. We will always find, guaranteed, an expert in the language that in which you are writing, in or outside of the jury. We have found experts for Indonesian. No matter how small the language is, we will find a specialist in that language to evaluate your writing sample.
What should be included in the CV? Work experience, date of birth?
I would say yes and no. Right now it's about your artistic CV, your artistic resume, about your publications and everything else that you've done artistically. A question about matriculation. So at the time of application and also during the stipend, you are not allowed to be matriculated as a student. One question about the stipend, whether it should be taxable. This has come up several times, I think, in the course of the chat. We cannot answer that. We're not qualified to answer it. The tax office is always the one to decide that on an individual basis, and you should definitely are required to declare that you've received the stipend, and then the tax office will decide. Basically, it should be not considered income taxable. But if the tax office does tax it, then you could put in a contradiction against that, and you also let us know. The idea of the stipend we can always confirm is as a tax-free basis. The important thing is that you look at the small print about putting in a contradiction. There is a deadline for the time. If you do have a tax put on the stipend, that you have to contradict that within a set amount of time. So make sure that you pay attention to those deadlines. I really don't know too much about this, but during the Corona days, we had some problems with this.
Are there any restrictions regarding any full or part-time occupations besides the stipendium and regarding Elternzeit?
There are no limits on receiving the stipendium in this condition, but I would like to ask you to consider that the stipend is intended to let you concentrate on your project. If you have a full-time job, the question is, will you get to your writing when you're employed that much? Otherwise, of course, we're not forcing you to go to part-time or to quit your job if you get the stipend. But it is certainly us asking you if you would have the time and energy to really write with this project if you receive the stipendium as a full-time employee. And if you're on parental leave, receiving parental leave funding from your job, the question would be whether the amount of funding for your parental leave would change because you get the stipend.
I want to use this a moment. I'm surprised that this question hasn't been asked. Is how does this procedure work? The jury procedure. We put together the jury. We have translators for many languages, English, Spanish, French, Hebrew, Turkish, a bit from experience which languages present in the application pool. And all other languages will be covered by special experts who write in a specific form that they receive beforehand about your text samples. These experts are in touch with the jury, and all these people are translators. So in the jury there are translators for some languages, and the experts are translators, and they can ask each other questions, and they are in touch with each other about your work. We make sure that all applications are reviewed by an expert of that language.
What is the breakdown by language of applications in the last few years?
That's always different. There's no tendency visible, no language that's especially present. It's changing from year to year. Just from the English language applications, you always know that there's at least one English language project receives the stipend. That's a calculation. That's statistics, but it's changing from year to year. It's not one language that's always present or one language that's always rejected or something. How many stipends are given out? I wrote 12 to 15, but it really depends on the sums that are applied for and how the jury is confirming the sums from 8, 16, 24,000.
Can I include a published short story in the 20 pages of examples together with an excerpt of the project I'm planning to work on with fund, or is it not allowed?
As we said several times, you may not send us something that has been published yet. The text sample has to come from an unfinished project, an unpublished project. You may also not mix it. The question was, I use some published material and some unpublished. This is unfair towards other applicants. who explicitly sent something from unpublished work. The text sample and the expose allows the jury to read what you're planning to do during the stipend period. Therefore, it must be an unfinished project. That's the aim of the funding, to enable you to continue working on that project. That's what we are supporting. If you upload something that was published already or that will be published soon, the funding doesn't reach its aim because it's finished already. There was another question regarding the family insurance that we missed. If the stipend has consequences for the family insurance, we cannot answer that. You need to talk to your health insurance company about this. Regarding income tax, usually the stipend is not counted as income taxable, but we can't say more about Social Security and health insurance. Then there's another question in the chat. If the matriculation status is relevant at the moment of application or during the stipend period, and the response is both. At the moment of application as well as during the stipend period, it is relevant that you are not matriculated. Yes. I think we responded to that question several times. If you're matriculated, you cannot apply, and if you're not yet matriculated and you apply, but then during the stipend period you will be matriculated, we cannot fund you. We cannot support people who are matriculated. I just want to say why we do it like this. If you are matriculated at the moment, you are receiving education, maybe writing education as well. Thus, your writing might be the result and the product of literature education, and thus we cannot compare your work to other applicants. But next year you may apply, please. The evaluation and quality judgment of an author is very subjective, especially in another language. Is the jury in touch with the expert who has been chosen to evaluate my text sample, or is the jury someone who knows the language as a first language? The jury is put together from translators from a range of languages. The languages that are not covered by the jury members, for those we receive expert evaluations from professional translators, experts from those languages. And if there are any further questions from the jury, they get in touch with the expert who wrote the expertise on this text, who's also a translator.
Thank you very much to Estelle, Amann, and Lilian Engelmann from the Culture Senate, and thanks again to my team. Yeah, good luck for the stipend.